Welcome to Billionaire Heart Stories. I want to tell you something important. The person sitting next to you on the subway, they might be a CEO. That quiet man in the modest apartment, he might own the building. That young woman everyone's judging, she might have more courage in her little finger than most people have in their entire lives. We live in a world that judges books by their covers. But the best stories, they're written on pages nobody thinks to read. This channel is dedicated to those hidden stories, to the people who choose dignity over display, to the moments when arrogance meets accountability, to the beautiful, devastating, perfect justice that comes when truth finally surfaces. If you believe people are more than what they appear to be, welcome home. You're exactly where you need to be. Samuel Porter's reflection didn't lie. It just showed truths he preferred to avoid. The bathroom mirror revealed every one of his 49 years, silver threading through dark hair like frost on October grass, lines carved deep around eyes that had smiled too much in the first half of his life and not nearly enough in the second. The bow tie refused to cooperate, dangling limp against his shirt collar like a surrender flag he wasn't ready to wave. Margaret used to tie it for him. Her fingers would move with practiced efficiency while she teased him about being helplessly incapable of basic formal wear operations. At 7 years, this tuxedo had hung in his closet, untouched since the last gala they'd attended together, before the diagnosis, before the desperate 18 months of experimental treatments, before the morning he woke up alone in a king-size bed that suddenly felt like an ocean. His South End apartment smelled like Mrs. Kowalski's pierogi from 2B onions and butter in the comfort of someone else's cooking. The radiator clanked its familiar rhythm, steam hissing through ancient pipes. Through his window, the November afternoon light painted the brick building across the alley in shades of rust and shadow. Someone on the third-floor fire escape was growing tomatoes in recycled paint cans, their green defiance against approaching winter, making Samuel's chest tighten with something he couldn't name. Plus one encouraged. That phrase from the Children's Hope Foundation invitation had broken something in him 2 weeks ago. Martha Henley's follow-up call had been worse, her voice smooth as expensive wine, explaining with careful delicacy that for seating arrangements, it would be ideal if you could bring a companion. We want to avoid any awkward placement. Translation. Don't remind us you're incomplete. Don't make donors uncomfortable with your widowerhood. Don't show up alone like evidence of mortality at our celebration of charitable virtue. So he'd hired prestige companions, professional, discreet, reviewed carefully on websites that promised elegant company for discerning clients. He'd chosen Lily Anderson from 5 photographs. Not because she was the youngest, though at 22 she was. Not because she was conventionally beautiful, though she was that too. But because something in her photographed eyes suggested she understood what it meant to hold yourself together when everything inside was falling apart. The doorbell's buzz cut through his thoughts at 5:07 p.m. Samuel descended the narrow staircase, each step creaking its familiar protest. The building's perpetual mildew smell rose from the basement, mixing with coffee from the first-floor couple who worked night shifts and drank caffeine like religion. He opened the door. Lily Anderson stood on his weathered stoop wearing a navy blue dress that caught the late afternoon light like water-catching sky. No performative smile, no overpracticed flirtation. Just a young woman meeting his eyes with quiet assessment, her small clutch held precisely against her hip, shoulders back in the posture of someone who'd learned to take up exactly the right amount of space, not too much, never too little. "Mr. Porter?" Her voice carried steadiness he hadn't expected. "Samuel, please." He stepped aside, suddenly aware of how small his apartment would seem to someone from her world. "Come in. I just need 2 minutes." And she entered without comment. No visible surprise at the secondhand furniture, the single-cup coffee maker, the stack of biomedical journals on the breakfast bar where most people kept decorative fruit bowls. Her gaze traveled the space with the practiced neutrality of someone accustomed to not judging. "Can I get you water? Coffee?" The offer felt inadequate. "I'm fine, thank you." Her attention landed on the bookshelf, on Margaret's photograph. The question came without preamble. "Your wife?" "Yes." The words scraped his throat raw. Lily didn't apologize or deflect. She was beautiful. She was. Samuel couldn't elaborate. Wouldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just present, like shared air. Lily seemed practiced at holding space without filling it with meaningless noise. He excused himself to finish the bow tie battle, retreating to the bathroom, where Margaret's voice still whispered instructions he could never quite follow. When he emerged, tie finally cooperating through sheer stubborn persistence, Lily was studying the view from his window, the brick alley, the fire escape tomatoes, the slice of city sky going pink with approaching evening. "Ready?" he asked. She turned, and for just a fraction of a second, something flickered across her face. Exhaustion that mirrored his own. The weariness of someone who'd spent too long holding a smile that didn't reach their core. Then it vanished, replaced by professional warmth. "Ready." They descended together. His 15-year-old Honda Civic waited at the curb, looking deeply embarrassed next to the sleek SUV idling for the couple in 3A. Samuel unlocked the passenger door manually. The fob had broken 2 years ago, and he'd never seen to the point of replacing it. And Lily slid in without hesitation, without judgment, as he navigated toward Back Bay. Friday traffic thickening around them like cognitive dissonance made physical. Samuel caught Lily's reflection in the window. She was studying her hands, thumbnail worrying the edge of her index finger. A nervous habit she didn't seem aware of performing. She's performing confidence, he realized, just like me. The Fairmont Copley Plaza rose before them. Wedding cake architecture dripping with old money grandeur. Valets in burgundy uniforms swarming cars worth more than Samuel's annual modest salary. Through tall windows, he could see chandeliers glittering like captive stars, the movement of people who belonged. He parked on the street 3 blocks away, cheaper than valet. More anonymous, more honest. As they walked toward the entrance, Lily's heels clicking precise rhythm against sidewalk, Samuel noticed her posture shift. The nervous hand worrying stopped. Her spine straightened. Her face arranged itself into pleasant neutrality. She's putting on armor, he thought, just like me. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the entrance. The valet opened the door with practiced deference. Harold Bennett emerged, silk scarf, polished shoes, a smile that stopped at his lips and never reached his calculating eyes. His gaze swept past Samuel dismissively, then landed on Lily with something sharp and assessing. Harold's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Well," he said, voice carrying just far enough. "This should be interesting." The Fairmont's ballroom was an exercise in controlled opulence. The kind of space designed to make you feel simultaneously privileged and inadequate. Crystal chandeliers refracted light into 1,000 small prisms, each one catching on diamond necklaces and platinum cufflinks and the polished surfaces of people who'd never questioned whether they belonged. Ice sculptures sweated elegantly onto silver trays, their slow dissolution a metaphor Samuel found uncomfortably apt. Waitstaff moved with choreographed precision, invisible until needed, silent testimony to service economy hierarchies. Samuel felt Margaret's absence like a phantom limb. She would have loved the absurdity of it, would have leaned close to whisper commentary about the woman wearing a necklace worth more than a modest house, the man adjusting his toupee when he thought no one was watching, the elaborate performance of caring about children's futures while spending $500 per plate to prove it. Lily stayed close to his elbow, her presence unobtrusive but grounding. She accepted a champagne flute from a passing tray, but didn't drink from it, just held it like a prop, something to occupy hands that might otherwise betray nervousness. Samuel noticed the way her eyes tracked the room with practiced efficiency, cataloging exits, assessing threat levels, noting who was watching them and with what expression. "You've done this before," he observed quietly. "Private events?" Her tone remained carefully neutral. "Yes." The admission hung between them, neither apologizing for it nor explaining it. Samuel understood. Everyone performed survival differently. They were approached immediately by Martha Henley, the Foundation's event coordinator, the woman whose velvet-voiced phone call had encouraged Samuel to bring a companion. She was 60-something, expensive perfume, announcing her presence 3 feet before arrival, hair set in sculptural waves that probably required engineering degrees to maintain. "Samuel." Her smile was too bright, her eyes sliding past him to assess Lily with surgical precision. "I'm so glad you could make it. And you brought a friend." The pause before friend carried enough weight to crush smaller words. "This is Lily Anderson," Samuel said evenly, refusing to let Martha's implication land unchallenged. "Lily, Martha coordinates tonight's event." "Lovely to meet you." Lily extended her hand with perfect composure. Martha shook it briefly, the kind of handshake that touched without connecting, her attention already moving onto more important people, more valuable connections. "Well, enjoy the evening. Dinner's at 7. Martha disappeared into the crowd like expensive smoke, leaving behind a trail of perfume and judgment. "She hates me," Lily murmured, her voice so quiet Samuel almost didn't hear it. "She doesn't know you." Doesn't matter." Lily's fingers tightened fractionally around her champagne flute. "She's already decided what I am." Before Samuel could respond, before he could find words that acknowledged the truth of what she'd said, without making it worse, a hand clapped his shoulder hard enough to sting, the kind of physical contact that established dominance while pretending to be friendly. "Samuel Porter. Didn't expect to see you here." Harold Bennett stood too close, his cologne aggressive and expensive, his smile fixed in place like taxidermy. He was 10 years younger than Samuel, but carried himself with the authority of someone who'd inherited the right to judge everyone else's existence. His wife Patricia hovered behind him, wearing diamonds and boredom in equal measure, her expression suggesting she'd perfected the art of being present without actually participating. "Harold," Samuel kept his voice neutral, refusing to give ground. Good to see you. Is it? Harold's gaze shifted to Lily, traveling deliberately from her face down to her shoes and back up. The assessment was meant to be insulting, a visual dissection designed to reduce a person to parts, to price tags, to categorical judgments. And who might this lovely young lady be? Lily Anderson. She didn't extend her hand. Smart woman. Anderson. Harold rolled the name around his mouth like he was tasting wine gone slightly off. I don't recognize the family name. Are you from Boston originally? It was a trap disguised as small talk. Which family? Which neighborhood? Which circles? Which tax bracket? Which bloodline makes you worthy of breathing our rarefied air? Ohio, Lily said calmly, refusing to elaborate. Dayton. Ah. Harold's smile sharpened like a blade catching light. And what brings you to our little gathering? Are you involved in children's advocacy work? I'm Samuel's guest tonight. His guest. Harold glanced at Samuel, then back to Lily, his expression performing surprise, while his eyes calculated cruelty. I see. That's generous of you. Samuel doesn't get out much these days. Not since... He stopped himself, feigned embarrassment with all the authenticity of a $3 bill. Well, difficult times. The reference to Margaret landed like a slap. Samuel felt his jaw tighten, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Margaret's name in Harold's mouth felt like desecration. Not because Harold was malicious, though he was, but because the reference was performative, designed to remind everyone within earshot that Samuel was an appendage to his late wife's legacy, not a person of value in his own right. Before Samuel could formulate a response that wouldn't escalate into something ugly, Lily stepped fractionally closer to him. Not possessive, not performative, just present. A silent statement. You're not alone in this? Actually, she said, her voice measured but firm. Samuel mentioned the foundation does remarkable work. I'm looking forward to learning more about your programs. And it was a perfect deflection, pivoting the conversation away from Samuel's grief and toward Harold's need to perform importance. But Harold wasn't interested in discussing the foundation. He was interested in establishing hierarchy, in making sure everyone understood their proper place in his carefully constructed universe. That's wonderful, Harold said, his voice dripping condescension like honey laced with arsenic. Though I imagine the work can be quite technical. The board meetings involve complex financial discussions, policy debates, not exactly accessible to everyone. The implication was crystal clear. You're too young, too female, too far outside our circle to understand real importance. Stay in your lane, know your place. Lily's expression didn't change. Her champagne flute didn't waver. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who'd been underestimated so many times she'd stopped caring about proving herself to small men. I imagine it's similar to the budget reconciliation work I did for the Dayton Arts Council. Grant management, fund allocation, impact assessment. Technical but not incomprehensible. Samuel felt something unexpected bloom in his chest. Admiration. She didn't have to defend herself. Didn't owe Harold anything. But she'd met his condescension with quiet competence, had demonstrated that his assumptions about her were just that. Assumptions built on prejudice and small-minded thinking. Harold's smile faltered. Just for a moment, just enough to reveal the man beneath the performance. Well, perhaps you're more capable than you appear. Perhaps, Lily agreed, her tone suggesting she'd noticed his retreat and was choosing grace over victory. The conversation died there, strangled by Harold's inability to continue condescending once his target had demonstrated competence. He excused himself with Patricia trailing behind like a beautifully dressed shadow, and they disappeared into the crowd, seeking easier prey. As they moved away, Samuel noticed several other guests watching, not with concern, but with the detached curiosity of people observing a social hierarchy being tested, a pecking order being challenged by someone who hadn't learned the rules about staying small. I'm sorry, Samuel said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he hadn't given himself permission to feel. That was inexcusable. Predictable, Lily finished, finally taking a sip of her champagne. Her hand was steady, but Samuel saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself together through sheer force of will. Men like him exist everywhere. They need you to be less so they can be more. You didn't have to engage with him. Yes, I did. She looked at him directly, something sharp and honest breaking through the professional veneer she'd maintained since entering the ballroom, because if I stayed silent, he would have spent the rest of the night treating you like you brought something shameful. I'm many things, Mr. Porter, but I'm not shameful. The words hung between them, declaration and defense, and the kind of raw honesty that cut through social performance like a knife through silk. Samuel realized with sudden, uncomfortable clarity that this transaction, this professional arrangement where he'd paid an agency for companionship, had become something else entirely. Lily wasn't performing for him anymore. She was defending both of them against a room that had already decided they didn't belong. Samuel, he corrected gently, his voice carrying more emotion than he'd intended. Please call me Samuel. Samuel, she repeated. The smallest smile touched her mouth, transforming her face from professionally pleasant to genuinely warm. Across the ballroom, Samuel caught Harold watching them again. The older man's expression was calculating, predatory, the look of someone who'd identified prey and was planning the hunt. Samuel recognized that expression, had seen it in boardrooms, in academic settings, in any space where power was being redistributed and someone felt threatened by the change. Harold had decided that they were worth destroying. The question was only when and how. The evening had just begun, and already Samuel felt exhausted by the weight of performing normalcy, of pretending this was just another charity event, of ignoring the way every conversation felt like warfare, conducted with wine glasses and fake smiles. This was going to be a very long night. Across the room, a woman in a catering uniform, mid-50s, tired eyes, the worn-down expression of someone working their third shift of the week, struggled with a heavy tray of champagne flutes. She stumbled slightly, one glass wobbled precariously. Before Samuel could move to help, a manager intercepted her, pulling her aside with a hissed reprimand loud enough to carry. The woman's face flushed with shame, her shoulders curving inward. Samuel made a mental note, find her later, make sure she's okay. He didn't notice Harold watching this interaction with interest, his expression suggesting he'd just been handed a weapon he intended to use. A bell chimed, signaling dinner. Samuel offered Lily his arm. As they moved towards the dining room with the rest of the elegant crowd, a whisper cut through the ambient noise, loud enough to be heard, quiet enough to maintain deniability. Well, at least he can still afford an escort. The seating arrangement was strategic warfare disguised as etiquette. Table 12 sat far enough from the foundation board's main table to signal Samuel and Lily's periphery status, close enough to the kitchen's swinging doors to catch every clatter of service, every hissed instruction from managers to staff. Their table companions were a carefully curated mix, a retired judge whose hearing aids whistled intermittently like tiny steam engines, a young nonprofit director too nervous to make eye contact with anyone, and, positioned directly across from them like chess opponents, Harold and Patricia Bennett. Samuel pulled out Lily's chair. The mahogany creaked slightly as she settled, smoothing her navy dress, tucking her clutch beneath the table with practiced efficiency. Patricia watched this with the detached interest of someone observing an anthropological exhibit, studying native customs from safe distance. So Lily. Patricia's voice came before the first course even arrived, sugary with false warmth, each word coated in something that resembled kindness but tasted like poison. Samuel mentioned you're from Ohio. How do you two know each other? It was the evening's first direct assault. How did a girl from Dayton end up at a black-tie Boston gala with a man twice her age? What's your angle? What are you after? Lily didn't flinch. Her voice remained steady, professional, giving away nothing. We met through a mutual connection. Technically true. The agency was in its way a connector of people who needed things from each other. Samuel appreciated her precision, the way she could be honest without revealing everything, the way she navigated interrogation without lying or over-explaining. How lovely. Patricia continued, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. And what do you do? Professionally, I mean. Samuel felt the table's attention sharpen. Even the retired judge's hearing aids seemed to stop whistling. Everyone leaned in fractionally, waiting to hear how this young woman would explain her presence, her purpose, her right to occupy space at their table. I'm completing my undergraduate degree, Lily said evenly, meeting Patricia's gaze without wavering. Part-time, I work to cover expenses. Work. Harold leaned forward slightly, his expensive cologne mixing with the faint smell of kitchen grease from the nearby doors. His smile was a blade. What kind of work? The question carried weight, not curiosity but excavation. He was looking for the thing he could use to diminish her, the vulnerability he could exploit, the label he could apply that would reduce her to a category he understood and could dismiss. Hospitality consulting? Lily answered, her voice carrying just enough specificity to sound legitimate while remaining artfully vague. Event coordination? Client management? Harold's eyes narrowed fractionally. He knew she was being evasive, but he couldn't call her out without revealing his own predatory interest in cataloging her vulnerabilities. The social contract of polite conversation became a cage. He wanted to interrogate, but couldn't without exposing his cruelty. The first course arrived. Delicate arrangements of scallops over microgreens, plated with the kind of artistic precision that Samuel found vaguely ridiculous. He picked up his fork, noticed Lily doing the same, her movements betraying no nervousness. She'd been to dinners like this before, he realized. Not as a guest, perhaps, but as staff, watching from the margins, learning the rituals and performances of wealth. Your wife, Patricia said suddenly, pivoting her attention to Samuel with the calculated timing of someone who'd been waiting for the right moment to strike. Margaret, wasn't it? I remember her from the Foundation's early days. Such a force. So passionate about children's education. Samuel set down his fork carefully, his appetite vanishing like morning fog. Margaret's name in Patricia's mouth felt like desecration. Not because Patricia was cruel. She wasn't. Not really. But because the reference was performative, designed to remind everyone at the table that Samuel was an appendage to his late wife's legacy, not a person of value in his own right. She was, Samuel said quietly, each word requiring effort, passionate about a lot of things. Must be so difficult, Patricia continued, her voice dripping with practiced sympathy that didn't quite reach her eyes. Moving forward without her, finding companionship, her gaze slid meaningfully to Lily. The implication was naked now, stripped of pretense. You're replacing her with this young woman. How pathetic, how desperate, how inappropriate. Samuel felt rage kindle in his chest. Not hot and explosive, but cold and controlled. The kind of anger that came from being reduced to grief and loneliness. While people watched and judged and decided they knew his story better than he did. Before he could respond, before he could find words that defended himself without confirming their assumptions, Lily spoke. I don't think anyone replaces someone they've lost, she said, her voice measured but firm, carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from lived experience, not theory. They make room for new people while still honoring the past. It's not a betrayal, it's survival. The table fell silent. The nonprofit director stopped pushing food around her plate. The judge's hearing aids whistled once, sharply. Patricia's smile froze on her face like water turning to ice. Harold recovered first, his voice dripping with condescension that would have been funny if it weren't so calculated. Well said. Very philosophical for someone so young? Tell me, Lily, do you have experience with grief? Or is this more of an academic observation? The cruelty was surgical, precise. He was asking if her defense of Samuel came from genuine understanding, or if she was just performing empathy for money, playing a role she'd been paid to inhabit for one evening. Lily met his gaze without wavering, without defensive anger, just steady truth. My father died when I was 16, cancer. My mother still talks to his photograph every morning. I used to think it was sad, but now I understand. She's not stuck in the past. She's carrying him into her present. It's love, not weakness. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. Even Harold had nothing to say. Patricia looked away, uncomfortable. The nonprofit director's eyes shimmered with tears she was trying not to shed. Samuel felt something crack open inside his chest. Not grief this time, but recognition. This young woman, hired to perform companionship for an evening, had just articulated what he'd been unable to explain to therapists, friends, colleagues for 3 years. Margaret wasn't a ghost he was trying to escape. She was part of the architecture of who he was now, woven into his choices and values and the way he moved through the world. The rest of dinner passed in stilted conversation. Foundation finances, recent galas, upcoming fundraisers, but the earlier hostility had been blunted. Harold and Patricia made sporadic attempts at small talk, but the heart had gone out of their performance. Lily participated when spoken to, her responses polite but never submissive, never apologizing for taking up space. Samuel noticed Harold's frustration growing with each exchange. The older man had expected to dominate this interaction, to reduce Lily to stammering embarrassment, but she refused to comply. She wouldn't perform shame or inadequacy or the deference Harold needed to feel powerful. As dessert was served, a trio of chocolate preparations Samuel would barely touch, Harold leaned back in his chair, studying them both with renewed calculation. The look of someone who'd been checkmated, but was already planning the next game. You know, Samuel, he said casually, his voice carrying just far enough to be heard at neighboring tables. The board has been discussing the direction of the Foundation's future. There's concern about maintaining our standards, ensuring board members represent the values we espouse. It wasn't subtle. It was a threat wrapped in bureaucratic language. We're watching you. Your presence here is contingent on our approval. Step out of line and we'll remove you. Samuel set down his dessert fork with careful precision. The Foundation's values, he said quietly, each word deliberate, as I recall from Margaret's involvement, were about providing opportunities to children regardless of their circumstance. Funny how that principle seems to stop applying once they grow up and attend galas. Harold's expression darkened. Patricia touched his arm, a warning to let it go, to not escalate further. But Harold was too invested now in establishing dominance, in making sure Samuel understood his place in the hierarchy. Some circumstances, he said slowly, his voice dropping to something more dangerous, raise questions about judgment, about the choices people make when they're lonely. The word lonely was delivered like a diagnosis, like pathology, like evidence of weakness that invalidated everything else about a person. Lily's hand, resting on the table beside her water glass, curled into a fist. Before Samuel could respond, before he could defend himself against the accusation that his grief had made him vulnerable to poor judgment. The evening's MC approached the microphone on the main stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could have your attention." The room settled. Harold sat back, satisfied that he'd landed his blow, that he'd established his power over Samuel in front of witnesses. But as the MC began discussing the foundation's impact, children served, families supported, futures changed, Samuel felt Lily lean slightly toward him. Her voice was barely audible, just a whisper cutting through the ambient noise of applause and clinking glasses. "My age," she said, so quietly he almost didn't hear it. "It's not a problem for you, right?" Time stopped. Around them, the MC's voice continued. Audience members applauded politely. Servers cleared dessert plates with practiced efficiency. But Samuel only heard Lily's words echoing in his skull, revealing layers of vulnerability he hadn't expected, hadn't prepared for. She wasn't asking about legality, not about appearances or social judgment. She was asking if he saw her, actually saw Lily Anderson the person, or if he saw a category, a role, a transaction that made him uncomfortable with himself. He turned to look at her fully. Her eyes were steady but vulnerable, and Samuel realized with sudden clarity what courage it took to ask that question. To make herself so exposed in a room full of people who'd already decided what she was worth. "No," he said quietly, meaning it completely. "It's not a problem, not even close." And across the room, the catering woman from earlier, the one who'd stumbled, was being escorted toward the exit by security. She was crying, trying to explain something, her words lost in the noise of the gala. No one at the surrounding tables even looked up, just another invisible person having an invisible crisis. Samuel watched Harold notice this scene, watched a small, satisfied smile touch his lips. The MC's voice rang out. "And now, a few words from our board chair, Harold Bennett." Harold rose, buttoning his jacket with the confidence of someone who'd already won. As he passed behind Samuel and Lily's chairs, he paused, leaned down. His voice was barely audible, meant only for them. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Mr. Porter, while you still have the seat at tables like this." The gala exhaled its final breath around 10 p.m. Samuel watched the crowd thin like morning fog burning off, guests retrieving luxury cars from valet, air-kissing promises to lunch soon, already forgetting the Foundation's mission before they'd crossed the threshold. He and Lily stood near the coat check, the evening's weight pressing down like a physical thing. "Your car is 3 blocks away," Lily reminded him gently. "I know." Samuel didn't move. Through the tall windows, he could see city lights reflecting off the Charles River, a view Margaret loved, a place she'd made him promise to keep visiting. "Would you mind walking before I drive you home?" Lily studied his face, reading something there. Not at all. They exited into November cold. Boston's autumn had sharpened into early winter, the air brittle and clear, bare tree branches etched black against the orange glow of streetlights. Samuel offered Lily his jacket, but she shook her head. "I'm all right. The cold helps." "Helps what?" "Reminds me I'm real." She said it lightly, but Samuel heard the weight beneath. After nights like this, it's easy to forget. They walked in silence toward the Charles River Esplanade, passing late joggers and MIT students, probably procrastinating papers. The city's noise dimmed to background hum. Samuel led them to a specific bench near the Longfellow Bridge. Unremarkable weathered wood with a small, brass plaque, in memory of Margaret Porter, who believed every child deserved to see their own potential. Lily saw it, understood. She sat without asking permission, leaving space for Samuel to join her. "I had this installed 2 years ago," Samuel said, settling beside her. "The foundation board approved it. They thought I wanted it because she was a major donor," which was true. "But mostly I wanted it because this was her favorite spot in Boston." "Why here?" She said it was the only place in the city where she could see both the past and the future at once. Samuel gestured toward the river, where the Longfellow Bridge's old stone architecture met the modern skyline. Old Boston, New Boston, all reflected in the same water. Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then, "She sounds like she was remarkable." "She was," Samuel's voice cracked. "Margaret made sense of things. I could get lost in research, but she always saw the human side. She'd visit children's hospitals and spend hours talking to kids about what they wanted to be. Astronauts, mostly. She collected astronaut jokes to tell them." "What was her favorite?" "Why did the astronaut break up with his girlfriend?" Samuel paused. "He needed space." Lily laughed, genuinely. "That's terrible." "Margaret's specialty." Samuel felt tears threaten. "She died 3 years ago. Lymphoma. I hired you tonight because I couldn't face those people alone. The pity. The judgment. I thought having someone with me would shield me." "Did it?" "No, it just changed what they judged me for." Lily pulled her knees up slightly. "Can I tell you something? I'm 22. I work for Prestige Companions because it pays better than waitressing. I'm studying social work at Boston College, part-time because full-time is unaffordable. My mother has early onset Parkinson's. The medication costs more than insurance covers. I send her $1,200 every month, which is exactly why I can't afford to turn down jobs like tonight. Samuel turned to look at her fully. When Harold asked about my age, he wasn't asking, he was announcing. Announcing that I don't deserve respect because I'm young and in a room I wasn't born into. But you, she paused, you treated me like a human being. So I needed to know, my age really isn't a problem? Not at all, Samuel said. Lily, you reminded me I'm still capable of connection. That grief doesn't have to mean isolation. The river moved past them, dark water catching fragments of bridge lights. Samuel thought about Margaret's promise, to keep living, to stay human, to never let grief calcify into bitterness. Thank you, he said, for tonight, for what you said at dinner. Thank you for answering my question the right way. As they walked back toward his car, Samuel passed a 24-hour diner. Through the window, he glimpsed the catering woman from the gala, sitting alone at a booth, head in her hands. He slowed, considering stopping, but the moment passed. When they reached Lily's building in Alston, she hesitated. Samuel, what Harold said about the board, is he actually a threat to you? Samuel considered lying, then remembered her insistence on honesty. He might be, but I'll handle it. How? I'm not sure yet. He offered a tired smile. Lily scribbled her number on a receipt. If you need someone to talk to, not as a client, just as someone who understands, you have my number. Use it. Please, she disappeared inside. Samuel sat in his idling car, the handwritten number on his dashboard, feeling something shift. Samuel woke Saturday morning to 3 voicemail messages, all left before 7 a.m. The first was from Richard Hayes, his handpicked CEO at Porter Biotechnologies. Samuel, call me. The board needs your input on the new clinical trial funding. I know you want to stay away, but this one requires your specific knowledge. The second was from his sister in California. Sam, I saw the Foundation Gala photos on their website. You look miserable. Please tell me you're taking care of yourself. The third was from Martha Henley. Mr. Porter, I wanted to give you a courtesy call. Harold Bennett has requested an emergency board meeting to discuss, quote, member conduct standards. I thought you should know. Samuel set his phone down, stared at weak November sunlight filtering through his apartment windows. His modest South End space felt simultaneously too small and too empty. Margaret's photograph watched from the bookshelf with that same eternal smile. He should call Richard back. Should focus on the work that actually mattered. Cancer research, clinical trials, the science that might save someone else's Margaret. But instead, he thought about Lily's question. My age. It's not a problem, right? He pulled out the receipt with her handwritten number. Texted instead of calling, is this strange? You asked me to use this number if I needed to talk. I don't know if I need to, but I wanted to. Samuel. Her response came 15 minutes later, not strange. What's on your mind? They texted for 2 hours, not about the gala directly, but everything around it. Lily told him about her mother's latest doctor's appointment, medication adjusted, tremors improving. Samuel told her about Margaret's astronaut jokes, how she'd practiced them on him before visiting hospitals. It was the most human conversation Samuel had had in 3 years. That evening, Samuel drove to the South End Charitable Kitchen where he'd been quietly volunteering for 6 months. He plated food for 50 people, most experiencing homelessness, some just struggling between paychecks. A regular named Tommy asked about his week. Went to a fancy gala? Samuel said. Did you eat tiny food on big plates? Yes. Did people pretend to care about charity while spending $500 per seat? Also yes. Tommy grinned. And how was it? Samuel considered, clarifying. And on Sunday, he couldn't stop thinking about the catering woman. He called the Fairmont, eventually reached a supervisor named Angela. I was at the Children's Hope Gala Friday night. There was a woman on your staff, mid-50s, dark hair, who was escorted out by security. I'm trying to reach her. Sir, I can't give out employee information. I'm not asking for her address. I just want to know if she's okay, if she still has her job. Silence. Then, she was terminated Friday night. Protocol violation, she dropped one tray and lost her job. Sir, I can't discuss former employees. Can you give me her first name? So I know who to send references to if she needs them. A pause. Dolores, thank you. Samuel immediately called his contact at Boston Hospitality Staffing, a woman named Sandra who owed him a favor. Sandra, I need you to find someone. Dolores worked catering at the Fairmont, just terminated. I have a consulting budget that could use someone with her skills. Samuel, you don't have catering needs. I will by Monday. That night, Samuel pulled out his laptop, searched his Porter Bio account for one name, Harold Bennett. The search returned 6 results from 3 years ago. Harold had invested $50,000 in Porter Bio's early stages, barely registering on the company's balance sheet, but enough to make him a minor shareholder. Harold was always someone who needed to feel important, Samuel realized, who measured his worth by proximity to power. His phone buzzed. Text from Lily. Random question. If you could have dinner anywhere in Boston, truly anywhere, no budget restrictions, where would you go? Samuel smiled. That diner near your building. The one that serves breakfast all day. You? Same answer, though I'd order their pancakes. They're unreasonably good. I'll remember that. On Monday morning, Samuel did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He called Richard Hayes and said, I'm coming to the office. Not just for the signature. I'm coming back. A certified letter arrived by courier that afternoon. Inside was a formal notice. You are hereby summoned to attend an emergency board meeting, November 15th, 10 a.m., to address concerns regarding member conduct. Your presence is mandatory. Failure to attend may result in removal from the board. The signature, Harold Bennett, board chair. Samuel read it twice, then picked up his phone. Dialed Lily's number. She answered on the second ring. Lily, I need to ask you something. And you can absolutely say no, but I'm going to need a witness. Monday morning, 1:45 p.m. Samuel stood outside 200 Technology Square in Cambridge's Kendall Square, a building he owned but hadn't entered in 18 months. The glass and steel structure rose 12 stories, Porter Biotechnologies emblazoned across the top floor. Through the lobby windows, he could see the living wall of ferns Margaret had insisted would remind everyone that science flows like water, not spreadsheets. Richard Hayes met him in the lobby, surprise and relief warring on his face. Samuel, I didn't think you'd actually come. I said I would. The board meeting was perfunctory. 7 members, all rising when Samuel entered. The clinical trial approval required 20 minutes. Safety protocols, budget allocation, timeline projections. Samuel signed where indicated, his legal signature moving $47 million with a few pen strokes. Dr. Sarah Lynn, Porter Bio's chief research officer and Margaret's closest friend, pulled him aside afterward. Samuel, are you actually back? Or is this another flyby? I don't know yet. That's honest, at least. Sarah's expression softened. There's something you should know. Last week, we had an inquiry from a reporter asking about ownership structure, your current involvement, Boston Magazine. The reporter specifically mentioned the Children's Hope Foundation Gala. Samuel's stomach tightened. When was this? Thursday, day before your gala. Sarah watched his face. Someone's digging into you, Samuel. That evening, Samuel drove to Dolores Martinez's address in Dorchester, a triple-decker with peeling paint, chain-link fence around a tiny yard. The woman who answered looked smaller than at the gala. Wearing sweatpants and a faded Celtics t-shirt, recognition flashed across her face, followed by fear. You were at the party. Did they send you? No. I'm Samuel Porter. I saw what happened Friday night. I wanted to check if you're okay. And her defenses crumbled. I lost my job, 23 years in catering. And inside her immaculate apartment, family photographs covering every surface, religious icons on walls, the smell of arroz con pollo from the kitchen. Dolores explained. Someone tripped me. I saw him, older man, expensive suit. He stepped into my path deliberately. When the glasses fell, he complained loudly about incompetent staff. Security came. My manager didn't ask, just fired me. The man who tripped you, did he have gray hair, silk scarf? Yes. You know him? Harold Bennett. Cold certainty settled in Samuel's chest. He did it on purpose. Samuel offered her a consulting position, hospitality logistics for biotech events, better pay than the Fairmont. Dolores started crying. I have 3 grandchildren. My daughter works 2 jobs. I was sending money to help with rent. Then we'll make sure you can keep sending it. Samuel paused. Dolores, did you notice anything else about Harold that night? She thought carefully. After he tripped me, while security was escorting me out, I heard him talking to someone. They were laughing. The other man said something like, That's one problem handled. Now for the bigger fish. Then Harold said, the widower, already in motion. Boston Magazine owes me a favor. Samuel's blood ran cold. Harold hadn't just humiliated Dolores for sport. He'd done it as a demonstration. And the Boston Magazine inquiry wasn't random journalism. It was Harold's orchestrated attack. Tuesday afternoon, Samuel met Lily at Boston Commons Frog Pond. She arrived wearing a BU sweatshirt and jeans, looking impossibly young in the November cold. Tell me everything you remember about Harold, Samuel said. Lily recounted methodically. Harold's calculated questions, Patricia's pointed inquiries, the whispered threat. Then she added, Before dinner started, Harold pulled out his phone. He was taking photos, not selfies. He was photographing something specific. Your table setting, your place card. He was gathering intelligence, Samuel said quietly. The foundation has called an emergency board meeting, he told her. Thursday morning. Harold's trying to have me removed. I think he knows more about me than he should. Do you need me there? As a witness? I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm offering. And Lily's voice was steel. Harold Bennett treated us both like garbage. Someone needs to stand up and say it's not okay. Wednesday afternoon, Samuel visited Margaret's grave in Mount Auburn Cemetery. He sat on cold ground, traced her name with his fingers. I've been hiding, Maggie. But something's changing. I'm going to stop hiding now. I'm going to show them who I really am. I think you'd approve. That night, Samuel's phone buzzed with an email from an address he didn't recognize. Mr. Porter, I work for Boston Magazine. I was assigned to write a story about Children's Hope Foundation board members. My editor has unusual interest in your background. If you want to comment before publication, contact me. Julia Reeves attached was a draft article. Samuel opened it. The headline read, Playing Poor, How One Foundation Board Member Lives a Lie. The first paragraph, Samuel Porter presents himself as a modest biomed consultant, attending charity galas with hired companions. But sources close to the Children's Hope Foundation question whether his humble appearance masks something troubling, a man clinging to relevance through his late wife's legacy. Board Chair Harold Bennett calls it concerning behavior that warrants investigation. Samuel's hands shook. Harold wasn't trying to expose Samuel's wealth. He was framing his modesty as deception, his grief as pathology. Samuel didn't sleep Wednesday night. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table with Julia Reeves' draft article pulled up on his laptop, reading it over and over until the words blurred together into a portrait of someone he barely recognized. Harold's strategy was insidious in its simplicity. Frame Samuel's chosen modesty as pathological. Paint him as a man so damaged by grief he'd become unreliable, possibly dishonest. Suggest that hiring Lily was inappropriate judgment at best, predatory behavior at worst. The article never explicitly stated anything actionable, just asked questions that left readers to draw ugly conclusions. Why does a foundation board member live so far below his means? What is he hiding? Why does he avoid public events unless accompanied by young women from escort agencies? Is this the leadership example the Children's Hope Foundation wants to set? At 3 a.m., Samuel typed an email to Julia Reeves. Ms. Reeves, I'll answer every question you have, but I need 48 hours before publication. Not to cover anything up, to correct the record properly. You owe your readers accuracy, not just speed. Give me until Saturday. Samuel Porter. She responded at 3:47 a.m. Mr. Porter, my editor wants this published Thursday afternoon right after your board meeting. He's been very clear about timing. But I'll ask for a delay. No promises. At 6 a.m. Thursday morning, Samuel received a text from Lily. I'm coming to the board meeting. Don't try to talk me out of it. See you at 9:45. He texted back. This could get ugly. I'm familiar with ugly. It's where I do my best work. Samuel showered, dressed carefully. Not in his usual modest clothing, but in the Tom Ford suit he wore to Margaret's funeral, the last time he needed armor. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a man who'd been erased, choosing to be visible again. The silver in his hair caught morning light. The lines around his eyes told stories he was finally ready to acknowledge. Richard Hayes called at 7:30. I have everything you asked for. Samuel, are you sure about this? Once you do this, there's no going back to anonymity. I'm sure. Meet me at the foundation office at 9:30. Bring everything. The Children's Hope Foundation occupied a brownstone in Back Bay, 3 blocks from the Fairmont, where the gala was held. Samuel arrived at 9:40, found Lily waiting on the front steps. She wore a professional dress, hair pulled back, minimal makeup, the armor of someone preparing for battle. You came, he said. I said I would. She studied his face. Are you ready? No, but I'm doing it anyway. They entered together. The receptionist, a young man named Marcus who always smiled at Samuel, did a double take. Mr. Porter, the meeting's upstairs. Conference room there, waiting. Samuel and Lily climbed the stairs. On the second-floor landing, they passed Margaret's memorial plaque. Margaret Rose Porter, founding benefactor, 1968 to 2021. Every child deserves to see their own potential. Samuel touched it once, gently. Lily noticed, but didn't comment. The conference room door was closed. Voices murmured inside, the sound of people preparing for confrontation, rehearsing their lines, positioning themselves for the performance to come. Samuel checked his watch, 9:58. Richard Hayes appeared at the top of the stairs, carrying a leather portfolio, slightly out of breath. Everything's here. Richard said quietly, handing Samuel the portfolio. Are you absolutely certain? Yes. The portfolio felt heavy, not from the weight of documents inside, but from what they represented. 3 years of hiding, 3 years of honoring Margaret's request to live modestly, 3 years of letting people like Harold define the terms of his existence. Because confrontation required energy he didn't possess. But something about Friday night had cracked that careful numbness open. Lily's question, my age, it's not a problem, right? Had forced him to see himself through someone else's eyes. Had made him recognize that his modesty had become a different kind of performance, a way of staying small because small felt safer than visible. Margaret wouldn't have wanted him small. She'd wanted him human, and being human sometimes meant standing up, even when standing felt impossible. At exactly 10 o'clock, Samuel opened the conference room door. 10 board members sat around the table. Harold Bennett at the head, Patricia beside him, Martha Henley, the event coordinator, several others Samuel recognized from foundation events. Doctors, lawyers, business owners, all people who'd known Margaret's work, who'd benefited from her generosity, who were now prepared to judge him. They turned as one when he entered. Samuel, Harold said, his voice dripping false concern that didn't reach his calculating eyes. Good of you to come. And you brought your friend. Lily Anderson, Samuel said clearly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. She's here as my guest and witness. Witness. Harold's smile sharpened like a blade catching morning light. How dramatic. Please sit. Samuel and Lily took seats at the far end of the table. Richard Hayes remained standing near the door, a silent presence, an anchor. The room smelled like expensive coffee and cologne and the particular tension that came before battles that would leave casualties. Harold cleared his throat, shuffled papers with theatrical precision. As you know, Samuel, this emergency meeting was called to address concerns about conduct unbecoming of a board member. Specifically, questions have arisen about your judgment, your behavior at our recent gala, and whether you're capable of upholding the standards this foundation requires. What standards? Samuel asked calmly, keeping his voice level. Dignity, propriety, respect for the foundation's mission and Margaret's legacy. Harold paused for effect, letting the words hang in the air like an accusation. Samuel, you hired an escort to accompany you to a children's charity event. You presented her as your date, deceiving donors and board members alike. You've been living in a manner inconsistent with someone of your position. My position, Samuel interrupted quietly, as a mid-level consultant. Your position as Margaret Porter's widower, as someone the foundation trusted to carry forward her vision. Harold's voice hardened, his mask slipping to reveal the cruelty beneath. Instead, you've become an embarrassment. Withdrawn, isolated, making questionable choices about companionship. The board deserves better. Margaret's memory deserves better. The room was silent. Patricia looked uncomfortable. Martha Henley studied her manicured nails. The other board members watched with the careful neutrality of people who'd already chosen sides, but didn't want to appear complicit. Samuel stood slowly, opened the leather portfolio, removed a single document, slid it across the polished mahogany table to Harold with deliberate precision. That, Samuel said quietly, each word carrying the weight of 3 years' silence, is the founding charter of the Children's Hope Foundation, signed July 15th, 2003. You'll notice 2 signatures at the bottom. Harold picked up the document, his confident expression beginning to falter. Margaret Rose Porter, Samuel continued, his voice growing stronger, and Samuel James Porter. We founded this organization together 22 years ago, before you were a board member, Harold. Before most of this current board existed, we funded the first building with $2 million from my biotech company. Margaret ran operations. I stayed in the background, because that's what we agreed. She was the public face. I was the infrastructure. The room had gone completely, absolutely still. When Margaret died, Samuel's voice remained steady despite the emotion threatening to break through. I honored her request to step back from public life, to grieve privately, to live modestly, but I never stopped supporting this foundation. Last fiscal year alone, I donated $870,000 through an anonymous fund. The scholarship program you're so proud of, Harold, the one you mention in every speech, I've been funding 60% of it for 3 years. Harold's face had gone white. His hands trembled slightly as they held the charter. That's not... You can't prove... Samuel slid another document across the table. Bank transfers. All documented. All traceable to accounts held by Porter Biotechnologies. The company I founded 30 years ago. The company currently valued at $2.3 billion. The company where I remain majority shareholder and founder. A board member gasped audibly. Patricia's mouth fell open. Martha Henley looked like she might faint. The careful neutrality in the room shattered into shock, confusion, and the dawning realization that everything they'd assumed about Samuel Porter was catastrophically wrong. You want to discuss my judgment, Harold? Samuel's voice turned to ice. Let's discuss yours. The photograph Harold slammed onto the conference table was slightly blurred but unmistakable. Samuel and Lily sitting together on a bench at Boston Common, Lily in her BU sweatshirt, Samuel in his jacket, clearly mid-conversation. The timestamp read, Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. You had me followed, Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying more disappointment than anger. I had someone verify concerns. Harold's voice mixed triumph with venom, his mask completely stripped away now to reveal the petty cruelty beneath. This is what you call appropriate conduct? Secret meetings with your hired escort? Continuing the relationship after the event you paid her for? What exactly is the nature of this arrangement, Samuel? Several board members leaned forward to see the photograph. Patricia looked horrified, not at the image, but at her husband's behavior. Martha Henley whispered to the woman beside her, scandalized gossip already forming on her lips. But Samuel noticed something else. Lily hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. She was staring at Harold with an expression of pure, calm fury that transformed her face from pleasant to dangerous. The nature, Lily said, her voice cutting through the murmurs like a knife through silk, is friendship. Samuel texted asking if we could talk. I said yes. We met in a public park in broad daylight and discussed his options regarding this meeting. That's it. That's the entire sordid tale. Friendship. Harold laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and ugly in the elegant conference room. How convenient. How much did he pay you for that friendship, Ms. Anderson? Nothing, because unlike you, Mr. Bennett, some of us are capable of valuing people without transactional calculation. You're defending him because he's paying you. I'm defending him because you're a bully. Lily stood now, matching Harold's energy with controlled rage. You've spent this entire meeting trying to destroy a grieving man who's done nothing but honor his late wife's memory. You've weaponized his modesty, his privacy, his pain. You've tried to make his humanity into pathology. And why? Because it threatens you. Because Samuel Porter exists outside your neat little hierarchy, where money and status determine worth. I will not be lectured by a what, Harold? Samuel interrupted, standing beside Lily, his voice deadly quiet. Say it, whatever word you're thinking. Say it to her face. Harold's mouth opened, closed. The room held its breath. The word hung unspoken between them. Young, female, escort, hired, disposable. All the labels Harold wanted to apply, but couldn't say aloud without revealing exactly what he was. You can't, Samuel continued, his voice gaining strength, because if you say it out loud, everyone here will hear exactly what you are. You'll hear it yourself. So, instead, you take photographs, feed stories to magazines, trip catering workers, and call emergency meetings. You perform outrage about propriety while demonstrating none of it. Dr. James Morrison, the Foundation's longest-serving board member, a pediatric oncologist who'd worked alongside Margaret for years, cleared his throat. Harold, I think we need to address the elephant in the room. You've accused Samuel of deception, but from where I'm sitting, the only person who's been dishonest here is you. That's not... You knew who Samuel was, Doctor. Morrison continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen too much suffering to tolerate manufactured drama. We all did. We knew he co-founded this organization with Margaret. We knew he stepped back after her death. Some of us knew about his continued financial support. You've been on this board for 8 years, Harold. You've seen Samuel's name on founding documents, on building dedications, on scholarship awards. You knew. You just chose to weaponize his grief because it gave you power over him. Patricia Bennett touched her husband's arm. Harold, maybe we should... Don't. Harold shook her off, his composure cracking like ice under pressure. This is about maintaining standards. About ensuring that people in positions of influence behave appropriately. By what standard? Another board member spoke up. Diane Chen, director of a youth literacy nonprofit. By whose definition of appropriate? Harold, you hired a private investigator to photograph Samuel having coffee with a friend. You deliberately injured a catering worker to demonstrate your power. You fed damaging stories to the press before this meeting even happened. If we're discussing inappropriate behavior, perhaps we should start with yours. The momentum in the room had shifted. Samuel could feel it, the way power redistributed itself in real time, the way people who stayed silent found their voices when someone else broke the paralysis first. Harold seemed to feel it too. His face reddened, his hands clenching into fists on the table. I will not stand here and be attacked by people who don't understand what's at stake. This foundation carries Margaret Porter's name, her legacy. We have a responsibility to ensure that legacy isn't tarnished by her widower's midlife crisis. Midlife crisis. And Samuel's voice dropped to something dangerous. Something that had been building for 3 years and was finally finding release. Is that what you call grief, Harold? Let me tell you about Margaret's legacy. It's not this building. It's not the gala or the tax write-offs or the society photographs. Her legacy is the kid in Roxbury who got a scholarship to MIT because we funded his high school's STEM program. It's the single mother in Dorchester who can afford childcare because we subsidize that center. It's every person we help without asking what they're worth or where they come from or whether they fit your definition of deserving. Samuel pulled out another document from Richard's portfolio. This is my resignation from the board, effective immediately. I won't stay where my presence creates division. But this, he slid a second document across the table. This is the dissolution of my anonymous donation fund. Every dollar I've been giving to this foundation for 3 years will be redirected to other organizations, ones that understand Margaret's actual values. The room erupted. Board members shouting over each other, Patricia arguing with Harold in furious whispers, Doctor. Morrison trying to restore order. Martha Henley's voice cut through. Samuel, you can't just... You're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. $870,000 last year, Samuel confirmed, his voice cutting through the chaos. More the year before. It's my money. I can redirect it anywhere I choose. And I choose not to fund an organization that let Harold Bennett use Margaret's memory as a weapon. Harold's face had gone from red to purple, rage and humiliation warring for dominance. You're making a mistake. Without this board seat, you're just another rich man hiding from his responsibilities. No, Harold. Without you, I'm just a man trying to honor his wife's wishes. Samuel turned to the other board members, his voice softer now. I'm sorry it came to this. Margaret loved this foundation. So do I. But she would never have tolerated what just happened here. Using pain as leverage, treating people like props in power games. There was a knock at the conference room door. Marcus appeared, nervous but determined, phone in hand. Excuse me, but there's a journalist here from Boston Magazine. Julia Reeves. She says, he paused, looked at Harold meaningfully. She says she received an anonymous tip that this meeting was happening and that there might be a story here about board member misconduct. Every eye turned to Harold. He went very still. You invited press, Doctor, Morrison said slowly, the pieces falling into place. To a closed board meeting. To what? Broadcast Samuel's humiliation? To make sure your version of events went public first? I invited accountability, Harold said, but his voice had lost its conviction, the words hollow. Samuel looked at Harold for a long moment, really looked at him, saw the desperation beneath the cruelty, the fear beneath the performance. You asked why I live modestly, Harold. Here's the truth. Margaret made me promise not to let grief turn me into someone who forgets what it means to be human. Every choice I've made has been honoring that promise. Samuel's voice hardened. You, on the other hand, use your position to diminish others, to create hierarchies that center your importance. You trip catering workers, investigate widowers, weaponize surveillance. That's not power, Harold. It's pathology. He walked toward the door, Lily beside him. Richard Hayes followed, carrying the portfolio. As they passed Harold, Samuel paused one final time. I genuinely hope someday you get the help you need. They stood on Commonwealth Avenue as Harold Bennett's world collapsed behind closed doors. The November morning was crisp, sunlight breaking through clouds, cold air sharp in their lungs. Through the second-floor conference room window, Samuel could hear shouting, the board still in chaos. Harold's carefully constructed authority crumbling like sandstone under pressure. Patricia Bennett emerged from the building before Samuel could process what had just happened. She moved quickly, her usual composed expression cracked with something raw. Shame, exhaustion, the look of someone who'd been carrying a secret too heavy for too long. Samuel, I need to tell you something. Patricia glanced back at the building where her husband was still inside, still fighting a battle he'd already lost. About Harold, about why he, her voice caught. Not here. Can we meet somewhere private today? Before Samuel could respond, the foundation's door burst open. Harold stormed out, spotted them, pointed at Samuel with a shaking hand. This isn't over. You think you're righteous? You're delusional. Margaret must be ashamed. His voice broke. Then, horrifyingly, so did he. Harold Bennett, board chairman, old money Boston elite, the man who'd spent weeks orchestrating Samuel's destruction, began crying on Commonwealth Avenue at 11 a.m. on a Thursday morning. His shoulders shook. His expensive wool coat suddenly looked like costume on a collapsing frame. Passers-by glanced, then deliberately looked away with practiced Boston discretion. Patricia moved toward her husband without speaking. Doctor. Morrison and Diane Chin emerged from the building, took in the scene with careful assessment. Doctor. Morrison approached gently. Harold, why don't we table this discussion? Everyone needs time to process. Harold wiped his face roughly, his silk pocket square smearing with tears. Process how I've dedicated 8 years only to be humiliated by a man who abandoned everything the moment it got difficult. I didn't abandon anything, Samuel said quietly. I supported it while grieving privately. There's a difference. Harold got in his Mercedes like a scolded child. Patricia turned to Samuel, her voice urgent. Please, coffee, this afternoon. There are things you need to understand. 30 minutes later, they sat in a nearly empty Cambridge cafe near MYT, concrete floors, industrial lighting, the smell of burned espresso and academic stress. Harold had been deposited at their Beacon Hill home with instructions to think about his behavior. Patricia wrapped both hands around her coffee mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. How much do you know about Harold's family? She asked. Old money, generational wealth. That's the public story. Patricia took a shaky breath. The truth is, Harold's grandfather made the family fortune through predatory lending in the 1950s and 60s, buying up properties from black families during white flight, redlining practices, exploitative loans. By the time fair housing laws caught up, the family was entrenched. Harold inherited money built on systemic exploitation. Samuel processed this carefully. Does he know? He knows. That's the problem. Patricia's voice cracked slightly. Harold's entire life has been about compensating for his grandfather's cruelty by performing philanthropy. Every board position, every charity gala, every generous donation, it's all penance. But the guilt runs so deep, he's twisted it into something toxic. He became obsessed with deserving wealth, with proving some people earn their position while others don't, and so he judges everyone else to avoid examining himself. Exactly. Patricia stared into her coffee. 23 years ago, Harold was engaged to a woman named Catherine Reeves, beautiful, intelligent, from a good family. He loved her desperately. 3 weeks before their wedding, Catherine left him for a public school teacher named Michael. She told Harold she couldn't marry someone who measured worth by bank accounts, that she'd met someone who saw her as a person, not a trophy. Samuel understood immediately. He saw me and Lily and saw Catherine and Michael, yes. And when he discovered you were actually wealthy, living modestly by choice? Patricia's hands trembled around her mug. It destroyed his entire worldview. If Samuel Porter can be a billionaire and choose to live humbly, ignore social hierarchies, value character over status, then what was the point of Harold's entire life? All his performance, his compensation, his desperate need to believe wealth equals worth, you invalidated it just by existing. Patricia pulled an envelope from her purse. Inside was Harold's resignation letter, unsigned. I wrote this morning. I knew what he was planning. I tried to talk him out of it, but he was obsessed. I should have stopped him. I didn't. So now I'm giving you this. He won't sign this willingly. Then I'll make it a condition of staying married. Patricia's voice hardened with resolve Samuel hadn't expected. Harold needs consequences, or he'll never change. This is my line in the sand. They sat in silence. Students typed on laptops, oblivious to the small human drama unfolding in the corner booth. What will you do? Samuel asked. After he resigns? I don't know. Maybe therapy. Maybe separation. Maybe I'll finally do something I've been considering. Using Bennett family money to fund a reparations initiative. Return some of what was stolen. Patricia managed a small smile. Margaret would approve of that, I think. She would. Samuel slid the resignation letter back. But Patricia, this needs to come from Harold, not coerced. He needs to recognize what he did was wrong. He won't, not without pressure. Then apply pressure, but make sure he understands why. Make sure he sees Dolores Martinez's face, Lily Anderson's face, my face when he weaponized my grief. Make him look at the actual human cost. Patricia nodded slowly, tucking the envelope away. They parted outside of the cafe, Patricia returning to Beacon Hill to confront her husband, Samuel walking aimlessly through MYT's campus while processing everything. He eventually called Lily. She answered immediately. How was coffee with Patricia? Illuminating, sad, complicated. Samuel recounted the conversation. Catherine Reeves, the grandfather's legacy, Harold's twisted compensation through cruelty. When he finished, Lily was quiet. Then, Samuel, can I ask you something? Always. Why did you really hire me? Not the surface reason, the deep one. Samuel leaned against the brick wall of Kendall Square T Station, watched trains come and go, considered lying, then chose honesty. Because I was lonely and tired of being lonely. Because I didn't want to walk into that room alone and feel like I was wearing my grief as a costume for people to judge. Because hiring someone felt safer than risking actual connection and possible rejection. It was cowardice dressed up as practicality. And now I'm glad I did it, but for completely different reasons. I'm glad I met you. I'm glad you reminded me what courage looks like. Do you want to get dinner? Lily asked. Not as client and escort, just as whatever we are now. Samuel smiled despite everything. Friends who survived a rich man's meltdown together. That works. That diner near my place, the one with the unreasonably good pancakes? Perfect. As Samuel ended the call, his phone buzzed with an email. Julia Reeves. Mr. Porter, my editor just killed my hit piece. Patricia Bennett threatened legal action if we published anything based on Harold's allegations without verification. But I did independent research. Found your connection to Porter bio. Found your donation history. You're not the story Harold wanted me to write. You're a much better story. Can we still meet Saturday? I'd like to write about what actually happened. The real story. Julia Samuel read it twice, felt the weight of visibility settling on his shoulders. 3 years of hiding were ending. The question was whether he was ready for what came next. Another email arrived. This one from Harold Bennett directly. I hate you for what you did today, for exposing me, for making Patricia look at me like I'm broken. But mostly I hate you, because you're right. Margaret would be ashamed of me. And I don't know how to live with that. HB. Then, 30 seconds later, a third email. My resignation letter will be submitted tomorrow. I'll include a public apology to Dolores Martinez and a recommendation that you remain on the board. It won't fix what I did. Nothing will, but it's a start. HB. Saturday morning, Samuel met Julia Reeves at a South End coffee shop. His neighborhood, his territory. She was younger than he expected, maybe 30, with tired eyes that suggested she'd seen enough of humanity to be skeptical but not cynical. Thank you for meeting, Julia said, setting up her recorder. Can we start from the beginning? Why does a billionaire choose to live in a walk-up in South End? Samuel told her everything. Margaret's death, her final request, the promise he made, his retreat from public life not as escape but as honoring her values, the foundation work, the anonymous donations, the deliberate choice to live among people instead of above them. Julia listened, asked follow-up questions, took careful notes. When Samuel finished, she leaned back. This is going to be a very different article than my editor assigned. He wanted a takedown. What I'm hearing is a love story about grief and dignity. Will he let you write it? After Patricia Bennett's legal threat and my own research confirming Harold's creative interpretation of facts, he has to.
The
The article published Monday morning, The Billionaire Heart, How Samuel Porter Honors His Late Wife by Living Her Values. It was fair, thorough, empathetic. It discussed Harold's resignation without sensationalizing his breakdown. It quoted board members praising Samuel's quiet generosity. It treated Lily with respect, noting her academic achievements and caregiving role without reducing her to tabloid fodder. The Boston philanthropic community's reaction was immediate. Invitations flooded Samuel's email, board positions, speaking engagements, partnership opportunities. He declined most, accepted a few where the mission aligned with Margaret's values. Harold Bennett entered intensive therapy. Patricia emailed updates periodically. Her husband was beginning to confront his family's legacy, his own complicity, the wounds driving his cruelty. The Bennett family wealth was being redirected to fund reparations initiatives in Roxbury and Dorchester. Dolores Martinez became logistics coordinator for Samuel's new foundation, bringing 23 years of experience and fierce organizational skills. She also brought her 3 grandchildren to the office occasionally, and Samuel taught them terrible astronaut jokes Margaret would have loved. 2 months later, January. The Porter Dignity Foundation officially launched on January 15th, what would have been Margaret's 55th birthday. The mission statement was simple: supporting people, not just programs. Believing in human worth, independent of economic value. Lily Anderson attended the launch event, not as hired companion, but as guest and summer intern candidate. She stood with Samuel in the foundation's new Dorchester office, studying Margaret's photograph on the wall. She would love this, Lily said. I hope so. Samuel's voice was quiet. I'm still not sure I'm doing it right. You're honoring her by doing it at all. That's what matters. Later, as the celebration wound down, Samuel and Lily walked through Dorchester's streets. January cold bit through their coats, snow threatening but not yet falling. Can I ask you something? Lily said. That night at the gala, when I asked if my age was a problem, what were you really feeling? Samuel thought carefully. Terror, relief, shame that you had to ask. Gratitude that you did. Recognition that you were making yourself vulnerable to find out if I was safe, and determination to prove I was. You did. They walked in comfortable silence. Eventually, Lily spoke again. My mother wants to meet you. I'd like that. Really? Really. Lily, you've met my demons: grief, isolation, Margaret's memory. It's only fair I meet the people who matter to you. They reached Lily's building. She paused. Samuel, I don't know what this is. Us. this thing we've become, but I'm glad we became it. Me too. She hugged him briefly, then pulled back. Good night, billionaire. Good night, future social worker. Samuel drove home through Boston's streets. Inside his South End apartment, he pulled out Margaret's journal, read her final message. Samuel, don't hide. Don't let grief make you small. Your heart is too big for that. Remember that wealth isn't what you keep, it's what you give. Remember that dignity isn't earned, it's inherent. I love you, always. His phone buzzed. Text from Lily. Thank you for tonight, for everything, for seeing me. He texted back, thank you for asking if your age was a problem. It was the best question anyone's ever asked me. Outside, Boston settled into winter night. Inside, Samuel Porter, founder, widower, friend, slowly healing man, sat with Margaret's words and Lily's friendship and the weight of wealth that finally felt less like burden and more like responsibility. There's a particular kind of poverty that has nothing to do with bank accounts. It's the poverty of spirit that makes us measure human worth by zip codes and tax brackets. The poverty of imagination that can't conceive of billionaires choosing modesty or young women choosing dignity over easy assumptions. The poverty of compassion that makes us weapon kindness, surveillance generosity, and judge grief like it's something that should happen on a schedule we approve of. Samuel Porter wasn't hiding his wealth. He was protecting his humanity. There's a difference. Margaret understood what most of us forget, that the richest life isn't measured in commas, but in connections, not in what you accumulate, but in what you give freely. Not in the power you wield over others, but in the dignity you defend, yours and theirs. Harold Bennett spent years compensating for inherited guilt by performing importance, never realizing that true power isn't domination. It's the courage to be vulnerable. It's the strength to apologize. It's the wisdom to know that everyone carries invisible weights. Lily Anderson asked if her age was a problem because she'd learned young that the world judges first and understands never. Samuel answered correctly, not because he was wealthy, but because he was wise enough to know that seeing people, really seeing them, costs nothing and changes everything. The billionaire heart isn't about the size of the fortune. It's about the size of the compassion. It's understanding that dignity isn't something you earn through status or performance or belonging to the right circles. It's inherent. It's non-negotiable. It's the one thing we all deserve equally. Karma doesn't miss an address. It just takes time to deliver. And sometimes healing arrives through the simplest encounters, through a trembling question about age, and the kindness we choose to answer it with. Fictional disclaimer. Important notice. This story is a work of fiction. All characters, organizations, events, and scenarios depicted in this narrative are entirely fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or deceased, real companies, actual foundations, or specific events is purely coincidental. This story was created to inspire reflection on compassion, dignity, and the true meaning of wealth, not to represent any actual people or situations.